Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at the market site in Times Square, New York City, we have Richard Edelman. He's the CEO of Edelman. We're going to take a look at the 2020 Edelman Trust Barometer and some of the key attributes there. Richard, it's great to have you with us. And 20 years of trust. Give us a higher level view of what this is about.
So it started with the battle in Seattle in 1999 when the NGOs stormed the World Trade Organization meeting and protested globalization. Went on through the Iraq War, the Great Recession, the rise of India and China, and the development of social platforms such as Facebook. That had a knock-on effect into the last decade, which was mass-class divide, the battle for truth, the demise of government, and the revival of business in terms of trust.
All right, let's take a look at our first slide here, and this is where we're talking about income inequality. One of the first attributes you had mentioned, that it affects trust more than economic growth.
So what we see is a change in the ecosystem. It used to be that trust was related to GNP growth. Now the big change is income inequality. Those markets in the developed world that have high income inequality have a big trust gap between the mass and the class.
All right, and if we look at our next chart here, capitalism under fire, that certainly fits into that theme.
Well, look, when more than half the people say the system isn't working for me and capitalism may be more harm than good, it actually has to do with intrinsic fears, that they are concerned about their jobs, about their future income potential. It's not today's fear, it's fear about the prospects of tomorrow.
All right, and that's what we see on our next slide over here, worry about the future of work.
So when 83% say, I'm afraid of my job, and it's gig economy, it's globalization, or it's automation, and I don't have the skills necessary to compete, that's an existential threat. I think smart businesses are going to really focus on retraining workers.
All right, and if we move along to our next slide here, this is societal leaders are not trusted to address those challenges, and I would imagine in the past that's where you would go to first when you were looking for this type of training or trying to at least feel better about the economy in your job.
So the world is sort of divided in two parts here. One is I rely on experts, I still need scientists, but on the other I rely on my friends, my fellow employees, my colleagues. So trust is horizontal as well as vertical.
All right, now moving along to our next slide. Competence and ethical behaviors are a really key part of the trust barometer. No institution is seen being as both.
The big problem for business is good on competence, but not on ethics. And in fact, 3/4 of trust is related to the ethical behavior. Integrity is the core part of that. So are you telling the truth? Do you do the right thing in your supply chain? How you treat your workers?
Do you think that's going to change now that ESG is a bigger movement, not only from the institutional perspective, but stakeholders all around, from the employees all the way up?
Well, Larry Fink's proclamation of 2 weeks ago for BlackRock and that sustainability is going to be a core part of the mandate for his investment managers says everything. It really bespeaks a change. The financial community is going to drive this development.
Right, and this brings us to our last slide, the partnership between government and business. It doesn't seem as if we're going to get there on government policy alone, and that it's going to take both of them to work together.
Well, I think the key point is that business has stepped into the void left by government, whether it's on sustainability, whether it's on pay, whether it's on training. And the necessity, though, is on something like retraining, work with government on making community colleges better, get tax incentives and other things. Don't try and do it yourself. No one will believe business on its own.
What did you find out about media?
Media's got a problem because it's associated with social media. You know, the trust levels for social platforms are now at 25%. Mainstream media continues to do quite well, 60% plus. However, there are 40% of people who rely totally on social media for information. So it's a paradox between the belief and the behavior.
Yeah, and it's certainly going to, I would imagine social media usage is only going to increase because younger generations are essentially consuming their content that way.
But we're really, again, in this battle for truth where there's a desperation for connection and fact, and I think smart businesses, again, will become their own media companies and talk directly to their employees and their consumers, because that is really who's driving change.
All right, it's happening right here, right? Trade Talks going from Nasdaq straight to our viewers and partners. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining us at MarketSite. And thank you for joining me on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq.